Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Live and Unscripted. It has been a spell since we have done one, so I'm pretty tickled to be here this morning. I'm not behind the long arm, which is my usual happy place. Today, instead, I'm working at my sewing machine, and I have my cutting table in the shot because today I'm going to be working on piecing a backing for a quilt. So a little bit different topic. This was kind of born out of a workshop that I did in February, earlier in February, about creative backings, including unconventional fabric choices and creatively pieced ones. And so this idea has been in the forefront of my mind for a number of weeks. And then I was at our local quilting guild at a meeting in late January, and I came home with a stack of 3 scrappy quilt tops. And I agreed to add batting and backing and quilt them. And so looking at these tops then inspired me. Why don't I piece some creative backings? So that's what we're going to work on today. So we'll get into that in just a second. We've already, we took a minute to say hello to a bunch of you, and that's not on air here, but it is really, really good to be here with you today. I will mention briefly, I sent out a newsletter email yesterday, basically just clarifying why I've been quite quiet on YouTube and other places the last few weeks. And I have quite severe eczema, or atopic dermatitis, or AD, my doctors call it. And fortunately, it's not very visible on my face at this time, but it does make me feel unwell most of the time. And so I'm choosing to prioritize health. And so we're shifting things around a little bit. What ways can I support quilters and not necessarily always be on camera, as I've been a lot in the past? So bear with me as we kind of find our trim for the next few months as I'm doing treatments and things, and we'll just do what we can. But for sure, I'm keeping on sewing and keeping on making quilts. So I'll share whenever I can. Anyway, today's topic I thought was a good one for kind of a wider angle view of me working in a larger workspace. And we're going to talk about fabrics that I'm going to piece into a backing and actually cut them and do that process. So this is pretty informal because I'll be working with long yardages and cutting. And so the camera angles may not be that great, but we'll do our best to make it clear. And the thing is, you don't have to copy what I'm doing, right? It's not a lesson. So feel free to pull out your own sewing and be working on your own project. And whatever tips you can glean from this, great. Okay, Mr. Producer sounds like he has something. He's laughing over there. What's the scoop?
It's 2 parts.
There's 2 parts to this story. Here we go. With the gremlins, this is Dave typing. We've had crawling in our tech setup. I'm surprised you're hearing us at all and not hearing the chipmunks sing in a trio. Dave, bless his heart, typing's a problem too. Good one. Good one. I love that you guys have a sense of humor. I mean, that's what saves us, isn't it? Makes everything worthwhile. Okay, one more sip of coffee and we'll get started. Coffee. Yay. All right. So first off, let me show you some of these quilts so you kind of know where we're going. This is one of the scrappy quilts, right? It is simply, I would say they were 3-inch squares to start with, maybe 3.5. Okay, we're going to get a wider angle view a little bit, maybe? Yeah, perhaps, right? So it's about 60 by 80. It's a fairly big quilt. And for this one, I've already pieced most of the backing. I went to the greatest lengths for this one, and lots of you may not want to do this because of time. But the backing that I've started piecing, bear with me while I deal with all the piles, is right here. And as you can see, I've got to make it a little wider yet, but it is these giant 14-inch squares. Can you see that? All different kinds of fabric. Now, what I want to show you is how I arrived at that. So here's the big basket. Ugh. Is that in the way? No, that'll be fine. I had recently rifled through my stash, and I don't have a huge stash, mostly because I fairly regularly, like at least annually, go through it and pass on things that either I don't love anymore or things that I've used the fabric in multiple quilts already and I'm tired of it and I'm like, someone else could use this and appreciate it, or my tastes have changed. And so I endeavor not to shop a lot so that my stash does not get huge and I don't get a backlog of, just collected stuff that I don't use that fast. So this year I did a big one and I went through a whole bunch of my neutrals, but they tended toward the creams and the browns and the countries. And a lot of these are 10 years old or more. And I've really shifted into a little more contemporary look. I prefer the whiter or subtle blues or subtle grays for backings or for backgrounds anymore. And so what I did then is I put all those things that I was going to pass on to somebody else in this giant laundry basket, right? Fabric, 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 all kinds of fabric. And I had this basket sitting when these 3 charity quilts came to me. And I thought they are the perfect palette, the perfect, what's the word I want? Canvas, that's the word I want. The perfect canvas for piecing some of these fabrics that I have into a quilt backing. So for the one that I just showed you, because it tends toward the browns, I went through my basket and I picked my scraps that had quite brown, deep tan tones. I mean, there's everything. Like, look at this one. Trucks and milk jugs. So cute. This is from a store sample I made probably 15 years ago. Like, I'm done with that fabric. Mustaches of all kinds. Can you see them? So cute. I've used that on quilt backings probably 4 or 5 times. I'm done with it. So I took all of those and I found the largest square that I could get to get 3 out of a fabric width was 14 inches. So that backing I showed you is just 14-inch squares, and it's just a mix of all of these fabrics. Now, I still have scraps, and I'm still going to give these away, but I did use up a solid amount of this, and that was a good feeling. So then I went looking for my other 2 quilts. Let me show you those. Here's one. These are a little more colorful than the first one I showed you. And this is just half of it. So again, very scrappy, but you can see it's got the blue tones and it's got this, it's not really red. It's a kind of a French general-ish red. It's got those pinky coral tones. So that's one. And we'll keep that close by because we're going to talk about how I chose fabric for that. And then here's the other one. This one's really scrappy with that corally red. Okay, so the first thing I did was laid them out flat on the floor and measured them so that I know what size of backing I need to achieve. And I've got that written down and we'll talk about that a little more as we go on today. But let's talk about choosing fabrics. Clearly any of these would work, but I happen to have this one that has cherries in it. Now this is the cutest fabric. I've had it for forever. It might even be a Bonnie and Camille. It is. It's a Bonnie and Camille. Super cute. Little aqua pears and little red cherries. Adorable. However, I've had it forever and it never works with other things that I'm doing. When I do Bonnie and Camille prints, I want a more solid background. This is not colorful enough to be the focus fabric. So long story short, this has been sitting for forever. But look it plays quite nicely with that little red. So I thought, great, that's one of my main ones, and I have some yards of it. Then I looked at, well, it's got quite a bit of blue. If I put this here, you can see it. Ha, look at that. This has quite a bit of blue, right? And quite a strong thread running through it. So I looked at this scrap. And interestingly, this would have been, some of these pieces are literally, can you see the selvage is here? This is the long part. They're the trimmings from being used as a backing. But if you watched my workshop on creative backings, and by the way, I've pinned a link for that. You can get the instant access replay if you want to. But if you watch that, there was a lot of insertions. So an insertion of a strip between 2 fabrics to kind of offset, balance, all those things. These pieces work perfectly for that. But when I look at this, it's kind of insipid. And I certainly don't love it next to the cherries. Is there a better choice then? Let me bundle this back up so that when I give it away, it's all together for the next person, right? Into the basket it goes. Here's another bit. This is left over from a backing, again, years ago. And I thought, that actually works quite nicely with the cherries. It's reads a little more like a solid. Beautiful. Okay, what's a third one? If this is going to be a slim insertion, this is going to be a big one. I need another big one. This quilt, by the way, is 75 inches long, and I'm going to do my strips crossways. I found this one, and I love it. It's very creamy, very deep, just a warm tone. However, there's not enough of it, right? There's not enough of it to be another large piece. So that one got cut from the herd. Gone. And then I came across this one. You guys, this is a favorite. Let's see if I can find a little piece to show you. I've used this for a backing too. So I've got a long strip here. It's even got a seam in it. But this is Laura Ingalls fabric. You guys are my age. You know who Laura Ingalls is, right? And there's actually a little girl gamboling about. And it's super, super cute. Again, those warm, creamy colors. I'm like, those three work well together, right? So that's what I'm going to do as a backing for this one. I'm going to need to pay a little bit of attention because the Laura Ingalls fabric is directional. So that reinforces my decision. I want my stripes to run crossways, and I have to make sure that Laura is standing on her feet and not on her head in those bits, right? So I'll pay attention to that when I cut it. And let's just bundle all those into the basket, and then we'll talk about the third one. Okay, here's the third quilt. Where did I put my backing pieces for this one? Right here. I already chose them, you guys. I cheated. I wanted to know where I was going before I got on camera. Look at this. See what I've got here? Downton Abbey. Again, something that I've already used for backing on another quilt. But when I bought it, I just took the end of the bolt because it was so adorable and it was on sale and I didn't know what I was going to use it for. So I have some yardage left over, but not enough for a whole quilt. So it's the perfect candidate for using it for part of a backing and complementing it with something else. And then I found this other little country calico, right? But it's got the hints of pink in it that I think will play well with this quilt. Then, again, I talked about this in my creative backings workshop. I think it's sometimes too stark and other times too, what's the word? I just don't love when two fabrics that are quite different are side by side. That feels like a very sharp edge and not very graceful transition. So I like to insert something between them. So I went looking for something in this corally pink range. And this was on my stash shelf because I keep everything kind of by color. But I have this fabric which is red, but it has strong tones of that pinkish red, the same type of color that's in the backing. So I'm going to see if I can cobble together enough out of this to do like maybe a 5-inch or a 7-inch wide strip between these two. So that's what we're going to work on first. But before we do that, I'm going to show you guys something else. Let me set down the basket. It weighs about 50 pounds.
How many projects on? How are you tracking them?
Okay, let's have a look at this quilt. So before we get into the backing, I'm going to get on a hobby horse just a tiny bit, and I'm going to give you a look at this quilt, which was pieced by someone whom I don't know. Hopefully they're not watching. It's a great object lesson for what not to do when you're piecing a quilt, even if you're quilting it yourself, but especially if you're sending it to a long armor. Seriously, give a thought to her. Okay, let me find the part that I marked. Hang on a sec here. Oh, for goodness sakes. It's going to be in the last corner, the fourth corner. Dave, are you seeing my little tag? There it is. Okay, I'm going to start that little bit again. Before we dive into making our backing, I want to show you an object lesson of what not to do when you're piecing a quilt top. This was made by someone whom I don't know, and so hopefully they're not watching. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but there's quite a lot of things here that are easy to do better, and I'm going to just point a couple of them out, even though this is talking about backings today. So right here, for example, there is a triangle. Can you see that? That is not attached at all. There is a seam there that is not sewn. That is wide open. This is something that comes up from time to time when I'm quilting for clients, that they'll have a little piece that didn't catch in the seam allowance. And this is how I mark it for them. I'm going to go ahead and quilt this without that seam sewn because I can't get at it to sew it. And it needs to be hand stitched afterwards. So if I was doing this for a client, I would give it back to them with this little tag, and then they would know to do that. Can you guys see on the camera? I don't know that you can. This quilt is covered in little threads. Hundreds of little threads. So I'm going to take a lint roller to it. Like, it's not awful to do, but that's something that the quilt maker ought to do before they send it. And then too, I don't know that you can see it on this table here, but I feel like this might be an upcoming quilting project for one of my live and unscripted days, because this quilt is so unflat and unsquare, and care is going to have to be taken in which quilting design I choose, which leads me to another workshop. In April, and I have not announced this or promoted it yet, but in April, I'm doing a workshop on choosing edge-to-edge designs. And one of the criteria is when you've got a quilt that has challenges like crazy unevenness, ripples, waves, how do you choose a quilting design that's appropriate for that? Because some will make you tear your hair out and want to just hit yourself with a hammer. Others will help to control that waviness. So that workshop's coming up. Also, the whole thing was stitched with long stitches, longer than 1/8 of an inch. So what's happening is this whole edge, can you see that? These seams are all popping open. And already that edge is wavy. So I'm literally going to have to take this to my sewing machine before I quilt it and sew every one of those edges. That's the kind of thing that it takes you no more time as a sewer of a quilt to have a shorter stitch length. But having a shorter stitch length will secure these problems and keep them from happening. That's frustrating when you're a long armor, and there are dozens and dozens of these around the quilt, right? All popping open. So shorter stitch length helps. Victory lap of sewing a line of stitching all around when the quilt is finished also helps. Pressing is another one. And this, the seam allowances on the back go every which way. So I just took this to my pressing table over here and pressed it as flat as I could from the front and steamed it. That's all I can do. I can't do accurate pressing, but pressing sure does help. Pressing while you work, pressing before you sew seams in the opposite direction. So helpful for a quilter. Okay, have I caught them all? I think so. All right, let's put this one in a little heap off to the side, and let's start talking about our quilt backings. All right, I took my, which camera am I on, hon? That one.
I'm going to go on the main one, though, because I need to move the other one.
Okay, there we go. I did measure my quilts, and I wrote down the size of the quilt top, and then I kind of added my, excess that I need at the long arm so that I've got a result for what size of backing I want to get at a minimum, right? So that's what we're going to start doing. And I think to begin with, let's just assess.
Get some comments here.
Oh, Mr. Producer says we should take some comments. Let's do that. Let's do a few comments right now. I need coffee.
Okay. I've got a few. I'm going to begin with these, and you just have to be quiet.
Oh, lovely. Big healing hug. I appreciate it. Glad you're prioritizing your health. Glad you're back today. Me too. Great to have you back. Glad you're taking time to take care. Yep. I appreciate those. You guys are right. And I know this too. I know what's most important. So trying to balance, because I love quilting with you guys also. All right. We have questions actually? We do. Here they come. Love, love, love the quilt behind you. Thank you. That's a sweetie. Quilted Penguin, sunny and warm. Phoenix, Arizona. So glad you're feeling up to this. Would love to know about the quilt on the wall behind you. I think it's called Home for Christmas, but for sure the pattern is by Vanessa Christensen, and so are the fabrics, the ombre type fabrics. So that should help you find it. Savannah, going through a box while listening. It's a box of old sheets. Can I use a 50% cotton, 50% polyester percale sheet for a backing? I do it all the time, Savannah. Again, quite a lot of these questions are things that I addressed in my workshop, but I'll tell you this one. The reasoning behind perhaps not using that is it will have different shrinkage. Like it won't have any shrinkage if it's a used and washed quilt, where your quilt top might. If you're a non-pre-washer like I am, I've chosen to just embrace that. I let the top shrink a little more, and if the backing doesn't shrink, I don't care. The whole quilt still crinkles and gets that lovely, comforting look that I like. So just think that through, but I've done it many, many times, and I find it fine. Judy, are the backing sections 108 or 45 wide? They're 45, Judy. All the fabrics that I showed in my basket are just regular yardage, not specifically backing. So I'm going to have to piece stuff. Meg, as a long armor, I would really welcome a presentation on those unsquare quilt tops. I've done a few, Meg, particularly with wavy borders. If you put wavy borders in my YouTube channel, you'll get a couple episodes on that because that's probably the most common thing. But I think I'm going to save this pink one I was talking about today and do an episode quilting that one because it is wonky in a million directions. It's going to be a challenge, no doubt about it. Kirsten just came home from fabric shopping here in Spain. Good for you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a good stash. Good for you. Mr. Producer's checking something?
You're good.
Okay, that's it for questions. Got it. All right. So now, knowing that my quilt's got to be 66, my quilt backing has got to be 66 wide, and I want my pieces to go across, right? I need to get pieces that are 66. Let's just assess what we have here. I chose my fabrics in advance so I would know where I was going, but I didn't do the working out. I'm doing that on camera. Okay. So I've got this piece, which was trimmed off a backing, right, for another quilt. And it's got a selvage on this end right here. I'm losing track of which camera. And I've got this piece and this one, which have a selvage on the long end. So here's my thinking. I'm not opposed, especially when I'm piecing a backing creatively, I'm not opposed to using some fabric with lengthwise grain and some with crosswise, but my preference would always be to stay consistent. So if I'm going to cut two pieces and I need two, I want them to run on the same grain. So I'm going to use both of these because this one runs the other way, right? And so to put those together, they'll behave a little differently. Mr. Producer has another question. Okay, there's a shout out here. Let's see. It's not up yet. There we go. On my live break just in time, sending love to you and Uncle Dave. Oh, I love it. Station Nation. This is our niece, you guys, in Northern Canada who has a little coffee kiosk and a fabulous viewership on TikTok and YouTube. You should check her out. Station Nation. Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Back to it. Here we are. So, long story short, let's see how long this one is. What's the best way to measure? I do have a cutting mat, but not up on my board just now. I'll use my ruler for the moment. 24 inches and 7. That's 31 times 2. This is only 62 long. So it is not long enough. So we're going to have to piece it. So that means this one's going to be my width because I can't make this one any wider. And I want them both to run on the lengthwise grain. So I'm going to trim the selvage, a little bit of the selvage off this one, and whatever inch width is left, that's what I'm going to cut one from in this one, and that will be our insertion strip. So let us get out our cutting mat. And I'm probably going to talk a little less because I don't intend for this to be really a lesson, and also I tend to get lost in what I'm doing if I talk too much. I'm used to quilting and talking, but not really used to doing math and thinking and talking. So, we're just going to trim this up so it has a straight edge, and we've got the selvage, so we know that's on the straight of grain. My handy Martelli cutter, you guys. Funny story behind this one. I was a vendor at our local quilt show last fall, and I was talking about quilting at my sewing machine, and I was using the Martelli palm paddles to guide the fabric. And Martelli also had a booth, and I sold them out of palm paddles. So I went and introduced myself and talked to them, and they gave me this cutter for selling all their palm paddles for them. It was kind of a funny... Wasn't intentional, but everyone saw me using them and was like, whoa, I need one of those. And it worked quite nicely for both of us. So we're going to be able to get 3 3/4 inches. Perfect. And the truth is, I don't care what it measures. It doesn't have to be 3.5 or anything. It just needs to be consistent and able to be repeated on my other piece. So now I have one long piece, 3 3/4, And I don't need a ton of this one. Let me measure how much I need so I can keep whole chunks for whoever I'm going to give these to after. 27 twice. There's a lot of math involved in this, you guys. 27 twice is 54. I'm going to do about another 16 inches. That way I've got a nice big chunk to pass on. Actually, the red will probably go back in my stash. In case anyone cared, this is an Allison Glass fabric. I'm so fond of her fabrics and colors. I have quite a few of them in my stash. Okay, we'll toss that back in the basket. We're done with it. And we will make us a 3 3/4 inch piece out of this. One, two, three. Measure twice, cut once.
Imagine where that came from.
Okay, so now let's put those together. Hang on. See, this comes from talking. It's actually 3 5/8. So let's cut again. I don't want to be fussing with easing it and messing around. So the moral is not measure twice, cut once. The moral is measure the first one that you're trying to match twice. This is what happens when I talk and work. We'll just tuck those with our little scraps. Still useful. All right, now we're on to sewing them together. Right sides together, Susan, right sides together. Now I've got my machine loaded with just a, you can see it there, just a tan colored thread, a neutral, because that's closest to most of my colors that I'm working with today. And I do have a fairly short stitch length set, and therefore I do not need to backstitch at the end of my seams. I'm going to rely on my short stitch length. I've got it at 2 1/4. I think that's about right. My little leader ender. And I'm going to press this seam open. I probably won't do that for all the long ones, but... Oh, my iron is spitting. And you all just saw me iron on my cutting mat, and that was terrible. Again, talking. So let's keep the insertion. Let's get the other two cut, and then we'll move the cutting mat. Okay, Downton Abbey. Again, directional. So this bit here, while it is a nice, long, lovely bit, can you see? I need the words to read correctly, and this is the selvage. So that is not going to be useful, sadly.
I'm throwing this up as Jess is going to leave in a couple minutes. I want to catch your question.
Okay, Jess, how small does a stitch need to be to negate back stitching? 2.5 millimeters, Jess, or even 2 is better. And I use that when I'm piecing a quilt all the time because it saves time, frankly, to not have to backstitch. And it saves the awkwardness of that kind of forming almost a knot in the back. Okay. This is with the fabric. It's folded in half. And we've got a little more than a yard, right? But this is all I have. So I'm going to have to make 2 pieces in order to get a 66-inch length, right? So my way of thinking is going this way. I have the most of this fabric. So I will do this fully the width of the quilt, maybe even 1 1/4 times. And I'll do this fully the width of the quilt, however long half of it is. and I'll put the red in between. So there's going to be a lot more of this, like 2/3, 1/3, and a little smidge. I like that. I don't like to have two fabrics splitting the quilt right in half. I would not want this insertion to be right in the middle. I want it to be offset. I just think rule of thirds, it looks better. Meantime, let's cut this baby in half. There's a nice little fold line there, so I'll just use that for my marker. When you see me running the cutter, by the way, when I'm done, I flick the blade closed, and then you just run it a second to open it. So that's why you see me doing that so often. We're going to sew these together, and we will be sure to get Downton Abbey all right side up instead of one way and one the other. That would not be pretty. So there's that. Okay. More mental math. I need to see how much I need of this one. So I've got my Downton Abbey, my red, and then how much do I need of this one, so I know probably I'm going to have to cut 2 widths, but I just want to know that before I start. And my quilt is, my backing has to be 88 inches long, which is quite a bit. So I've got 24 inches there, plus about 3, 27 inches. Yep, so I need 2 widths of this. Let me see if I have enough of this, because it needs to be about 60 long also. If I don't have enough, I'll be adding another fabric in here. Yep, I'm going to have to add another one in. Dang it. Okay, let's take it one step at a time. First, I'm just getting a straight edge on both ends before I cut it in half. Whoops. The other one is straight. I do love a ruler that does one whole fold of fabric, so I don't have to do another fold. For years I did that, but if you've done it, you probably know the feeling. If you don't have everything absolutely squared up, and then when you open it up, you've kind of got an L shape ever so gently, nobody loves that feeling. Let me make sure I grab the right line there before I cut, because I turned around to talk to you. Yep, I did not. Okay, back up. This time I won't talk. Maybe this time I'll put a pin in it. How does that sound? Then I will not lose track of my little fold, my little crease line. Okay, now we're going to move the cutting mat and start sewing this together to see how much more we have to add. I'm going to have to add another fabric on the end. I'll think about adding another red strip, honestly, too, for another insertion. I'll ponder on that while I'm sewing. Now this little guy, I'm not going to take the time to match prints. I'm just not going to get that fussy about it. What I am going to do is put the two sides of the selvage that have the printing, that have the wider sort of a selvage, together. And I'll leave that on the outside edge. And by the way, as a long arm quilter, I do not mind if the selvage is left on a backing on the outside. I don't like it to be left on the interior seams. So you'll see I'm going to sew this one a little wider, and I'm going to trim the whole selvage off. It's thicker, it has a bit different weave, it just doesn't, I don't think, lay as flat inside the quilt. So I like to trim it off. I think I've mentioned already, but in case you're just chiming in, I did a workshop on creative backings just a couple of weeks ago, and the instant access replay of that is still available for a reduced cost. And in it, I gave tons and tons of pictures of ideas for how to creatively piece backings, most of them belonging to clients, because they were willing to provide me with so many pictures of their great ideas. And then secondly, I talked about some solid tips for how to do it in terms of like having flat seams or getting the whole thing to lay flat or be square, or even what I talked about this morning briefly, not dividing it in half with an insertion, but instead having things a little offset, a little asymmetrical. It's more pleasing, I think, to look at, and it's also much easier to deal with at the long arm when you're not trying to precisely center a quilt on a pieced backing. That can be difficult to do. So anyway, if piece backings appeal to you, you might want to invest in that workshop. There's a lot of ideas and it never expires, so you can go back to it and watch it as often as you want to. Alrighty. While I've got my cutting mat here, I will go ahead and just trim that selvage off. You could absolutely just do this with a ruler or with a pair of scissors too. I often do, but since I have my cutting mat right here, and I'm just trimming it to about 1/4 inch. It might be a little generous. My mat extends over my table. I can't cut all the way to the edge. There we go. If anyone wonders, by the way, this is a Tula pink mat. One of the things I like about it, Tula does so many things well. It's black on this side and pink on this, so your light fabrics, your dark fabrics. Thing of beauty. Okay, now let's move our cutting mat. So my niece Jess, who was on, who has the coffee kiosk a little bit ago, the name of their kiosk is actually Caffeination Station. And she has recently taken up making quilts. So we're having lots of fun having conversations over both, going on air and over making quilts. So she does quite a lot of going live from her coffee kiosk, and it's like your handy listen when you're commuting, right? She just chats. She's very upbeat. She's very talkative. And she has a huge following, which is lovely. Boom. Okay. I'm not going to worry just yet about how wide it is. I'm not going to trim that up. I just need to get enough of it pieced together to have 88 inches from top to bottom. So let's just make another pile. And you might have noticed, there we go. You might have noticed that I'm not pressing all the yardage. I don't usually for a backing. I'm making sure my seams are pressed flat, but as I do when it's just 1 or 2 pieces of fabric, when I load it on the long arm, I just spritz it gently with water and the folding creases that were in that fabric will relax out of it. And I've done that hundreds of times with great success. So trust me, it does work. You do not have to take the time to press every square inch. Okay, here's our red. And here's our Downton Abbey. So this is a very imprecise way. Lay it on the floor, run a tape measure along it. I definitely need more, but I need to see how much. We have got about 68 inches. So we need a solid 20 inches more. All right, back to the basket. Oof. Oh my gosh, fabric is heavy. Ugh. Let's see. We'll lift this quilt out. It would be kind of funny if we put Laura Ingalls with Downton Abbey, but we won't because that's two very, 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 very different genres, isn't it? So I need a piece that's got enough fabric that I can get 2 20-inch wide cuts, right? So it's got to be a fairly sizable one. This one would work, but it's quite blue. I don't know that that's my favorite. None of those have enough. Also this one, blue again. We may be stuck with that, you guys. I have quite a few fat quarters, but they won't do the trick because they're not, you know, it would take too much difficulty to get a wide piece. That's it. Okay. Let's just see how this looks for a sec. Stripe or dot? I think stripe is the ticket. Okay, so this is my answer. Let me just see. We have enough red to do another insertion that width. Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to have the pink dot first. It's going to be the biggest one. Small insertion of red. Downton Abbey next. Small insertion of red. Blue stripey at the bottom. That's what we're going to get. Is it an absolute work of art, you guys? It's not. But is it using up these fabrics and do they all play nicely with that scrappy quilt top? Yes. So we're just proceeding on. Using what we have. Okay. So I said I needed 20 inches. I'm going to be a bit generous and cut myself 22. Because Lordy, after all this, I don't want to run out. Don't want to run out of backing before I'm done quilting. So again, cutting a straight edge. It's a bit close quarters working on top of my table like this. I usually have a cutting surface that's much longer and I could, you know, spread things out a little better, but such is life. This way you're able to get a pretty decent view of it. Okay, 22 I said. There's one. Oh, I didn't get all the way through at the very beginning. There we go. And these are sweet fabrics. They're quilting cotton. They're lovely fabrics. So I'm content to find this way of using them up. Goes with that one, and we'll cut another red chunk. And what did I say? 3 5/8, right? And maybe after this, Dave will take a few comments again. I made the silly mistake again this morning of using my my Ember mug that keeps my coffee hot. I'm so in the habit of using that when I get up in the morning and have my morning coffee. And then by the time we get around to doing this live, the battery's shot. Nobody's fault but my own. My kids were good enough to give me one, and I love it. It's actually 3 7/8 because it was an 1/8 short of 4 inches. One. Do you know what? No, I cut that one to length. I was going to say I wouldn't need 2. I could have a piece off the other one, but that's not right. Never mind me. Just thinking out loud here. Boom. And I'll still save this little strip. You guys might remember me doing my scrappy, strippy chevron quilt. I use strips a lot for that. What I will do, though, is this will kind of go in my scrappy cupboard, and I actually have a basket for my scrappy strippies, so I'll sort that out later. I am a pretty diligent sorter. Like, I don't love my stuff to stack up in piles here and there. So when I'm done piecing these backings, I will sort through those bits and bobs, put them in their appropriate places, and or pass on the fabric that I'm going to give away. I try really hard to not just let it all pile up. That's just me. And again, I'm not taking the time to match the print of my fabric really carefully. I could, but that's a little much. And part of that decision, quite honestly, is the quality of the quilt top, right? If it was precision, I might invest more time in this, but as it is, I'm like, we're getting the best possible result out of this, but I'm not going to spend another half an hour carefully matching these prints. That doesn't seem like a good use of time. Oops. My little leader ender. Again, I'm sewing a wide seam so that I can trim the selvage off. And after this, the fun will begin. We'll start putting it together. This is where you absolutely could just take your scissors and buzz along here. I mean, these are kind of ridiculous short scissors for doing this, but you absolutely can. It can be hard to get a really long seam to lay straight under a ruler. So this is certainly an option. A slow one when you've got your thread snips, but it does work. It does work. Boom. You guys like my little bucket? This was my grandfather's little wooden bucket. It is so rickety, and I know it's too big for thread collection, but what else am I going to use it for? And this way it gets to be part of my days, and I love it. Okay, putting the fabric away. We do still need to put the red pieces together, don't we? Let's do that quick. These do not have selvage edges, so I don't have to do a bigger seam. All right, let's talk some questions while I get ready to press. And have a sip of coffee. All right. Nothing like it. Kathy, have you ever considered sewing 10-inch squares from scraps together for a backing? Yes, thought about it briefly and discarded it quickly. Just kidding. I do have clients that do that. I showed several of them in my workshop because I have one particular client who does quite a lot of that with 10-inch squares. Nothing wrong with that. It's quite time consuming. And again, I opted not to invest that much time in these quilts, but the one that I'm doing 14-inch squares on, even so, it was 35 squares. It's 5 by 7. So even that takes a fair bit of time to piece. So that was my option, and I could get 3 14-inch chunks out of a width of fabric. So that worked well for me. Where did you get your thread stand? Tammy Kelly. Tammy, it is by Vintage American. He does not have a stamp on the bottom. Modern American Vintage. That's what it's called, which is kind of a oxymoron a little bit. I assume you mean this little wooden thread stand. Yeah. And this, by the way, pulls up higher too. I've just got it shortened for today's purposes a little bit. It's a lovely thread stand, and it's a thing of beauty. I'll tip it so you can see it. See the little houndstooth? Anyway, this gentleman makes lots of wooden quilting tools, and he's at lots of quilt shows. I got mine at Houston, so I don't know if he's at the major ones or what, but Modern American Vintage, he's online too. His name is Chris. Nice gentleman. Marie Suzanne, so pleased to see you, stitching along with you in the UK and learning lots. Thank you. Good deal. You know, again, today is not a lesson, but sometimes it can just be helpful to sew along with somebody and just bad ideas back and forth. Okay, 2-part coming up. Do you ever add an annoyance tax to your price for those kinds of quilt tops? And Shelby, I'd be interested to know how Susan charges for those quilt tops with issues. So for one thing, these are charity quilts, so I'm not charging anybody. This is free. If it was a client and they came with a quilt like this, there would be several parts. Number one, I would ask them to do the thread removal. That is something I shouldn't have to do as the long armor. That's a job they ought to do, so I might suggest them taking it home and doing it, or I would charge them for it because that's the best way to remind them to not do it again, right? It's not like it means so much to me to save that 15 minutes, but that frankly helps them learn to not keep doing that, to do their part. Secondly, if it was a client, I would have opened this up and unfolded it and seen some of the issues with unlevelness, and we would have talked it over. I don't charge a surcharge for that. I don't spend a lot more time dealing with it. What I do is I convey to the client, you're probably not going to get a perfect result. Your quilt will probably not be perfectly square when it's done, and it may have pleats and puckers. So be aware of that. And that's my disclaimer. And it doesn't take me very much more time, minutes, to deal with it. I'm going to choose a quilting design that helps me. It's going to be curvy and smooshy so that I can pull in some of that fullness, and then it's going to be what it is at the end. Diane, long arming for my charity group has taught me a lot about paying attention to my own piecing skills. Yes, happy to see you. Great. I mean, it does, and that's why I chose to talk about it a little this morning, because my piecing skills have come a long way in the last 10 or 12 years too. And I have learned that I value having something that's a good quality result at the end, and I've learned that it doesn't take a lot more time. I don't want to discount, how shall I say, if you're a beginning quilter and you're having trouble getting things square, don't sweat it. That's beginner. Each quilt will get better. You know, one quilt you might learn how to press a little more accurately. Another you might learn how to cut a little more accurately, or, you know, make your points not get cut off. So just be progressing. But you're right, when you quilt for others and see all kinds of things, it does make you want to level up your game, for sure. Tracy, did you ever post a picture of the Eagles Quilt of Valor from last year? I haven't been able to find it. Oh my, Tracy. I thought I did, but I've done several Quilts of Valor recently, and I don't even know that I could go back and identify that one. So I'm sorry if I missed that. I've tried to get into the habit now that YouTube lets us post photos. That's where I post them. Used to be I had to remember to go get them and post them on social media and tell what episode it was in and all of that, right? So it's gotten a little bit easier. Kim, currently planning a move. Would it be better to try to sell my long arm, knowing I'm going to want a Q20 when I get there, or dismantle and trade in when I get there? I don't know that I have a hard and fast answer for that, Kim, because I've not done it. I think I might start by like going online and seeing what your machine is selling for and seeing if like prices like cars kind of go up and down a little bit on long arms. So if you can get a good price for it, that would save you the headache. Movers charge usually about $1,500 to move one. So that's what, like, it's time and it's work. There's no doubt about it. So it might be worth it to you. On the other hand, if prices are poor for selling your machine, it might be worth it to keep and try and sell in a different, demographic or where prices are better. So I don't have a great answer for you, Kim. I'm sorry.
Now I know what Alex and I are worth.
Dave's saying, now I know what Alex and I are worth. Alex is our son. And you guys have moved my long arm twice? Twice, yes. We moved my Gamel 2 times. I helped too. And yeah, that was no laughing matter. My first story for you guys, we'll come back to this, Dave. Story for you guys. My first Gamel long arm, we had in how you have a garage, above a garage, big old space in a house? That's where my long arm studio was. And our stairs had, a curve or two in it, and it was a 12-foot long arm. So the rails were 12 feet, and the table of it didn't come disassembled. So it was wide and 12 feet long, and we couldn't get it up the stairs. So we had to move that long arm in up the fire escape ladder in the garage. I very nearly burst a gasket, let me tell you. That was not fun, but we did it. And we moved it out too when we left that house. So, okay, Quilted Penguin. Susan, I hope you get a nice thank you from Vanessa Christensen. I'm probably not the only one who just bought that pattern based on seeing the quilt behind you. I'll ask her. I'll tell her I sent some people her way. It's not a new pattern. It's been out for a few years, but it is sweet. And I love her ombre fabrics because there's really not that many colors in those trees and stars. Like the trees, for example, or the lagoon geese is one fabric. You just cut light ones and medium and dark ones. And I just think that's so clever of Vanessa's fabrics. Judy, when you go to quilt it, how would you decide what color thread you'd use since both will be colorful? Judy, I'm pretty sure already I'm going to opt for something that's a little deeper than these creams. So right into the tan, light tan colors, something like this. Right, when I quilt it. It will work well on all the scrappy stuff on the front. It'll look fine on the red bits. That's what I'm going to do.
So you just have to be patient for a minute. I'm throwing a whole bunch of comments up in a row.
Okay, here's a bunch of comments coming in a row.
Her audience. We just
Okay.
from her audience.
Okay. This is Jess at the Caffeination Station, some of her audience. Let's see them. I look forward to this. Love you, Aunt Susan, from Jess. Perfect. Okay.
They're her audience.
So they're Jess's audience, which I just love.
Yes.
Love it. And they're all calling me Aunt, which I'm totally fine. I'll be everybody's aunt. It's all good. This is super. Thanks, Jess, for sending all these folks over. And I hope some of you go and check out Jess's station too. She is fun to listen to. So good, you guys. How fun.
I've lost track of the comments because
Thanks for posting. And I should mention here, if you guys actually have a legit question, put a QQ in front of it so Dave can search for it because he has now gotten swamped under lots of lovely well wishes.
We just went from 30 comments up to 254.
We went from 30 some comments to like 250 in a minute. So thanks, Jess, for sending everyone over to take over my little station. And hopefully we're sending some people to you too. Okay, good deal. And the lesson in all of this is more coffee.
Yes. Go to Caffeination Station. Okay, I do have a real question though.
Okay, here's a legit question. I have 3 lengths of 108-inch wide backing to sew together. Do you have a tip for making the seams straight? Rip it. I think I would, Jennifer. Here's why. 108-inch wide backings are notorious for being stretched askew as they're wound on the bolt because it's folded so many times. And they're almost always, the grain is so distorted. Back in my sewing garment days, we used to lay out our fabric and it wasn't always 45 wide, but it was much narrower than 108. It was sometimes 54, sometimes 60. Vintage fabric is 36. Oops, I just hit something on my sewing machine. We used to open out our fabric and check the grain, and you can literally pull it at a diagonal to straighten it. So you might want to do some of that also. But yes, ripping it will ensure that your seam line, however crooked it looks, is following the grain. So I think that's where I would go to get the best results. Sometimes people bring them to me and they haven't straightened them in any way and haven't ripped them, and I just load them on the long arm and quilt. And there is some distortion in it, but if you try and match two together, I think that's probably going to drive you nuts. So I think ripping is your best bet. Yeah, good plan.
I did that one. Here's one of Jess's
Mr.
too.
Producer's hunting. Oh, another one. What would my great grandma want color-wise? In a quilt? Oh gosh. I mean, I don't want to like pigeonhole her, but typically grandmas prefer softer colors and smaller print type calicos to the very bold, saturated, even graphic things that are more contemporary, but that's not always true. So I don't know. Ask her if you can. Judy, don't forget to move the cutting mat before pressing. Got it. Did that once. Fortunately, did not do any damage.
I can't remember if I asked this one. If I did, I'll take it off. Did I ask you this one?
No, this is a new one. Julie, is there an advantage to centering inserts versus offsetting inserts on pieced backings? A couple of thoughts in my head, Julie, is I think it looks more pleasing if they're offset, right? The old photography and art rule of thirds. I think it looks more pleasing to be offset. I think it's better not to have a seam smack in the middle because that's often where you fold a quilt and it's going to get more wear. So that's another reason for offsetting it. And also, which I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to perfectly center a quilt top, especially top to bottom, on a long arm. So it's easier if it just is offset and then you don't have to worry about 2 inches here and there. That's my thoughts. Our Jess is a troublemaker. I don't know. She did good things for me this morning. And every time I visit, I have coffee.
Appreciate this one. Sorry, they're taking over the show, so we're gonna have to play with it.
You're the smartest 25-year-old I've ever met. 25 with quite a few years of experience of being 25. Have you decided yet which thread your Q24 likes best? I remember you talked about that a while ago. This is a long question. I'm not going to get too deeply into it today. I'm still with my Isacord 100% poly. Now, I do have a couple other brands. I've got some Glide right now that I got from Habendash, and it's working fine too. I do love 100% poly. I don't think the issues that my machine was having had to do with thread type. One of these days, I'm going to get another YouTube episode made about that. I got a tip from a technician on how to clean my tension discs, and that solved a lot of my issues of quilting right to left and of not being able to handle different threads well. So that was a cleaning issue, not a thread issue. Yep. How big of a seam allowance are you leaving after trimming the selvages? A little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. Like nobody's going to see it, and it doesn't have to fit precisely, so it's up to you. I don't like to leave a big one because that's twice the layer of fabric, right? So I don't want lots and lots of extra fabric back there. Okay, very good. Let's keep going. We're ready to press so we can move the cutting mat. Pressing matters, pressing matters. That's my personal sauna right there. There's my red bit. This one I am going to press a little bit because it's got a lot of this. Can you guys see it? When you're at the end of a bolt, you get these super crinkly, hard creases. I am going to press that a little bit. I don't want to risk having those stitch into my backing. That would be a terrible thing. Also, it's even hard to work with to get it, flat seams to lay them together and pin when it's so creased up. Oh yeah, this is my personal sauna. Wow. Getting a steam bath here. I'd like to say to you guys, if you're ever by Jess's coffee station, grab a coffee, but the chances of you being there are slim to none. But just in case, I'll tell you where she is. She is right off, they have two locations, right off the Alaska Highway, on the southern tip of the Alaska Highway. So Fort St. John and Taylor, BC, Canada. So if you are ever traveling the Alaskan Highway, look for the little orange and green caffeination stations. Okay, we now have all our pieces. The next thing is, I would like to get them all the same width so they like match when I go to sew the seams together. Or the other option would be to make my left side all the same and trim it up afterwards. Maybe I'll try that just because it would be a great thing to illustrate. Something else that I like to do when I'm sewing these long seams together is to actually lay it flat and pin it before I take it to my sewing machine. And if I were doing this not on camera, I would literally lay the whole thing on the floor, smooth the 2 layers out so that one is not pulling tighter than the other. Sewing machines have a tendency to pull up that bottom just a little bit faster, and you don't want that to happen when you're sewing long seams because it can really make it difficult to get a flat seam. Let's put our measurements away. So I'm going to do it piece by piece here today. I think it's worth taking the time to pin. I think you get a much better result for it.
You're asking about your iron?
Someone is asking apparently about my iron. It's by Laura Starr. They make both a big old professional model and what I've got, which is their little lift. Let me show you. Right here. Can you see that? There we go. It's a little portable model. Even their small one is not inexpensive. I'm fortunate. Laura Starr gave it to me to use, but I tell you what, I love it. You've seen the amount of steam that it spits out. It's very, very, very fine steam, and it presses seams so flat, it eliminates the need for a clapper because it does that same thing. It presses it so flat. It even eliminates the need to, like, you know how we often say, press your seam first to set the thread and then open it? It does the thread setting all in one pass. Massive time saver. I love it. I am not worrying if my seams match up. Do you see the red one there? And see the cream one there? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. The critical thing here is just to keep them both flat and not have one eased into the other. And I'm pinning about every 8 inches. Maybe that's more than I would have to. I don't know. We'll see how far of a grip I can get on the fabric. Maybe I can get away with less pins. It's the same principle, you guys, as when you apply long borders. It just does not work to just go to your sewing machine, start at one end of the seam, and sew 2 long strips of fabric together and expect that at the end it will come out perfectly. And a lot of people do that with their borders, and then they just chop off the fabric that extends. But pretty much always you're off by 1/4 or 1/2 inch. And if you do several borders, that exacerbates. And if you have several seams in your backing, right, it's going to be very difficult to get a flat one. So in my opinion, taking the time to pin will give you a much better result. I've got... I'm curious, maybe Dave will put this into the polls. I'm curious how many of you sew standing up. I so much prefer to sew standing up as opposed to sitting down. Oh, I just broke the needle thread. Not sure what happened there. But we'll fix it. I had to pull it out backwards because it didn't extend past the front. Yeah, talking of standing to sew. I don't know. I find it more comfortable. It's a little bit harder to handle the bulk of the fabric because you can't have it sit in your lap when you're doing a big project like this. But to me, it's worth it. And just to be mobile and be on my feet, I so prefer it. I so have fewer aches and pains and all of that stuff when it's all said and done. I've been sewing on my little 301 lately, and so I'm used to manually upping and downing the presser foot. So I keep hesitating over the buttons here because I'm used to being back on that little manual machine. Cut off my big tail. Eight inches turns out is about right. I imagine it's blocked by the camera, but I'm actually holding up the weight of my fabric. I'm just a firm believer in that. If your sewing machine can't do the work of pulling it up on the table, so either you got to get the whole tail up here, or in this case, I'm just holding it up with my other hand so that the machine does not have to be pulling it. That will mess with your stitch length and your flatness. So aside from telling me your thoughts on stand-up versus sit-down sewing, I'd love to hear what you're working on today. Are you puzzling as I am, or are you at the total other end of the spectrum and working on a kit, maybe? Too bad I didn't remember to take my little leader ender off at the beginning. I am just going to trim my red fabric roughly with my scissors. All right, and for this seam, it is up to you if you want it open or not. It does lay a little flatter if it's open, and I did press my up and down seams, my joining seams open, but this is a long one and has a lot of work to press open, so I'm going to choose to press toward the red. My cutting mat is in the way of my handle here. While I'm pressing, Dave and I have been working on another new thing over here. I mean, really, Dave's been working on it. I'm just the brainstormer, but not really doing the job. We are working on creating an app, you guys, that will track your quilts, like your quilting projects, not your sewing or making a quilt project, for you. And we're calling it Stitch Q, by the way. And it has been really fun. Before we began, we did some kind of market research to see what's out there. And we could only find 2 existing programs that did this, and both of them are very old, like more than 10 years old. So just old data, old style, old, all those things. And so that's something that we've been working on. So watch for updates on that. It's just a handy app where you can record a quilt that comes in from a client, or like if you do a ton of charity quilts and maybe you want to, decide what's next and know when it's completed and archive the project when it's done. That's all in there, and it's very cool. Okay, I'm assembling this essentially from the bottom up. So I'm just going to work my way down my bits that are on the floor, right? The really scientific way. But the critical part is I need to have my Downton Abbey words going up. Did I sew these together? I didn't sew these together yet. So I will do that next. Who made this fabric, by the way? Andover. Of course they did. So on this one too, it's important that I do a wider seam allowance because I don't know if you can see it on camera, but the print falls off about 1/2 inch or more before the edge of the fabric. So I've got to be sure to trim that off. Again, I am not taking the time to match the fabric. My original quilt that I used it on, I did. So the Downton Abbey, worked everywhere and the repeats worked beautifully. I'm not doing that today. I'm just not. I haven't said very many times, but I will now. If you are enjoying this episode, I would love if you would give it a thumbs up. It helps it to get more visible to more quilters. And as always, these live and unscripted shows are just that. They are streamed absolutely live. We don't edit any of the faux pas like ironing on your cutting mat out of it. You get to see me at my best and my worst. Generally, I'm standing at the long arm quilting. And so I just feel like it is beneficial for quilters to see the reality of stuff, to see how long things take, to see, whether or not when your thread breaks, you start again in the middle of a quilt, all those sorts of things. And speaking of not editing out the oopses, I cut one of these longer than the other. Can you see that? I'm sure I was talking there too. So, back to the cutting mat to trim the longer one to be like the shorter one. Silly me. These things happen, especially when I'm talking. Ruler. Rotary cutter. Perfect. Just that easy. Little process to change working stations. I'm just going to step out of camera for a minute and grab my bigger scissors to trim this. I should have done it while I had the mat up, but I didn't. Big scissors. Perfect. That first blast of steam often has droplets in it. So into the air it goes. Then I get a nice gentle steam on my fabric. I think this one I'll give a wee bit of a press to. It just has a few of those, I don't know, I think of them as compression creases. And while I was pressing that, so I'm so glad I did, I saw something that maybe is not obvious to you there. I realized I did not square off both ends of this before I began cutting it. So my other piece is not square on that end. So I'm going to take this again to my cutting mat. Because I'm adding other fabrics onto both ends, it's important that it is even and straight. So we'll get this side well matched up, and then we'll flip it. And we'll fold it. Whoa! We want it all to be the same width. Just looking inside for where the shortest one is. Yeah, it's off almost 3/4 of an inch in the middle. Ruler. How are we doing for time, hon? All right. Well, we're not going to get 2 of them done today, are we? We're already an hour and a half in.
A bunch of questions and a bunch of answers that you're going to want to see. So.
There we go. Beautiful. All right. Mr. Producer's telling me there's some comments and answers that I want to see. So let me move my cutting mat and we'll have a look at some comments. I got one other fun thing to show you guys because I brought my water today too. Can you see my mug? Get it turned the right way, that way. My son brought this the other day and it says, it's got a little black cat because I have a black cat, right? There it is. People kind of stress me out, which is not really true, but makes a great water jug.
So I can't
Okay.
remember a few of these were in the payday and takeover. I don't know if the answer.
Okay, let's see if we don't want to double up on any. Yep, we did this one. Perfect. Forgot the question in my first chat. Oh, I have 3 pieces of 108. Yeah, we talked about this one too, rip a new edge. Same topic anyways. You're amazing. Thanks for having us. Oh, this is great. I'm so glad you came from the coffee shop. I am such a coffee fan. You may have told before, what iron do you use? I did mention that again. That's the Laura Star. Love it. I see where Jess gets her passion for sewing. Yes, and she's kind of new to the world of quilt making, but we have just welcomed her into the addiction. Diane, why not use a walking foot or equivalent when stitching the long seams? You absolutely could, Diane. I've got my even feed going on the back of my Bernina, so it works similarly to a walking foot in that it grabs both layers pretty firmly and pulls them through evenly. And I'm getting a nice flat seam, so that's the measuring stick. Love your cutting table. One day I will make one. One day I'll get a YouTube episode made about it because it is quite easy. Dave actually made this one. It's 2 inexpensive, like 9 cube shelves together and plywood. And we just wrap the plywood in batting and fabric. And every so often I take that fabric off and refresh it with new, like every couple of years. What do you do with all the trimmings you put into your bucket? Well, for a long time, I have taken all my textile trimmings and put them all in a pillowcase. And when the pillowcase gets full, sew it shut and take it to a pet facility. The one that I've always taken it to doesn't want them anymore. So now I'm looking for a new thing to do with them. That used to be my go-to. Batting scraps, fabric scraps. Yeah. Love an idea for that. Rosa, thanks so much for all your beautiful instruction. What kind of cutting mat are you using? It's by Tula Pink. Pink on one side and black on the other, which works lovely for light and dark fabrics to be able to use a contrasting mat. It's very helpful.
These are in answer.
These are to my poll, answers to my poll.
And I'm not going to stick them all in.
Okay, so here's a smattering of answers to my question of sitting or standing. Sit to sew, but always get up and down to press. We need to move. I so agree with you, Mary Ellen. Yep.
And then you asked about what they're working on.
Okay, and I asked about what you guys are working on. Okay, finishing straight line quilting through a 1940s Singer sewing machine. Love it. Love it. Working on a shirt for my granddaughter. Oh, this is great. I love doing other things besides quilting too. I'm so glad many of you do as well.
Thought you'd appreciate this one.
Working on a paper piece spiral monkey wrench, 50% sewing, 50% unsewing. Well, I hope you've at least got 51 of sewing or you're not gaining ground. Lori, working on a churn dash quilt using the beloved fabric line by Benartex. It'll be for my granddaughter's bedroom when they stay with me. Aw, that's sweet. Love that. Carol, you got me thinking about how to raise my sewing table so I can try standing to sew. I like the idea, at least for piecing. Yep. It feels so much better to me. Grant, working on a design for a quilt challenge from a guild that I belong to. Good for you. Good.
One of two.
One of two. Working on a flannel quilt that I made for my son when he went to college in 96, and he's literally worn holes, top, bat, and backing in the top 1/3. Okay. Part 2, he won't throw it away, so I have it completely apart and put in new blocks. Never thought he would have loved it as much as he did or does. I love that, honestly, Lauren. I did that with a denim one for one of our boys. So it had, just the denim and the flannel, and you know how you put those all together in squares and then seam allowances up and you fray them. Same story. But I didn't actually repair it. I replaced most of them. I just kept a few favorites. Susan, tried sewing standing up in the past. The cord to my pedal didn't reach the floor. Oh, that's sad. That's a terrible reason. I'm sorry.
I only did one.
Yeah.
This next one you have to explain to me.
Okay. Oh, Marga, making yo-yos while watching you. I totally know what you mean. But if there's anyone viewing who doesn't and Mr. Producer doesn't, yo-yos are, I would say, an old-fashioned quilt method. You take a circle, you sew around the perimeter of it and pull it in so it makes a circle. And on the back, it's flat, and on the front, it's like gathered all in, tight, closed. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of 70s vibes, I would say. Rebecca, later today, I'll finish sewing 4 sleep sacks for my great niece. What a treasure. Sleep sacks are a wonderful thing.
You're a fan of this.
Gloria, quilting a charity quilt, and I love manual mode. Yay, Gloria, good for you. I've made a converter. I've converted you. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, one more sip of coffee. Now, let's get back to our pinning. So let's keep organized. The blue is the bottom, then the red, then the Downton Abbey. And I'm starting all my piecing at that side so they all line up. And then when it's all together, I will trim the other side straight. And let's make sure we get our Downton Abbey words the right way. If this is the bottom of the quilt, the letters point upwards. That's what we want. Yes, we're definitely just going to get one finished today. And I think I will make a real effort to, I don't know what the next weeks will hold for sure, but tentatively I will plan to keep this quilt because there is no deadline on it anyways, and do an episode of quilting it. Then you get to see this backing in action, and we get to talk about some of the issues in the quilt top and, how I'm going to deal with those. It's going to be a challenge. I'm up for it. Again, if I was not on camera for this, I would literally have laid this out flat on the floor and laid the next piece on and made the whole thing flat and then just gone pin, 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 pin. It would be much faster than doing it bit by bit like this.
But we like to do hard things.
But either way, I think it's worth it. If any of you watching are really intrigued by this idea of standing tables, the one that I'm sewing at now is by Horn of America, and it's as sewing tables are that are specific for the purpose. It's very pricey. Again, I'm fortunate. I was gifted this one by Stitch House out of Richardson, Texas. But for my serger, which is in the other room, so I can't show you, I actually went to my local Home Depot and got one of their workbenches that has a little hand crank to raise and lower it. And it's fairly basic. It's just a butcher block looking top and one shallow drawer, but it's quite inexpensive. And that has served me very, very well for my serger. Oof, I'm trying to keep the weight of it up here. It's getting big. It's not really working, so back to holding it up with my other hand. That does work. Again, one of my methods when I'm not on camera is to have my chair. I have a rolling office chair, and I'll set that in front of me, like right under my desk, and just prop this over the back of the chair. Just another way to have it up. When I'm binding a quilt and it's really heavy and it's awkwardly in the way, I'll often take my ironing board, like not this one, but my garment ironing board that you can raise or lower, and I'll set it beside me and make it the same height as my table. That can be another helpful way to hold up the volume of something. It's hard for your sewing machine if it's got to do the work of pulling. It's really almost impossible. But it's also very difficult to sew a straight seam when it's, when you're having to hang on to the fabric or grip it. So the more you can pick the weight up, the easier it will be on you. Come on. Oh, that pin I only caught the top fabric. That's not very useful, is it? Try that again. There we are. Once again, I'm going to press toward the red. Can you see my seams are laying quite nice and flat? There's not easing or a ton of distortion. It's pretty critical when you get to putting multiple seams in the backing of a quilt. Especially if you're going to work at a long arm. I mean, if you're working at a sit-down machine too, but if you're working at a long arm, you cannot see the backing when you're quilting. So you need to be confident that it's managed underneath and there aren't strange things going on. So flat is important. Beautiful. Downton Abbey reads the right way up. Success. Okay, another red strip. This one I remember cutting to size, so chances are it's going to be short when I get to the other end, and that's okay. It's long enough for my quilt. But probably my cream-colored bits on both sides of it will be much longer, I'm guessing. We were talking briefly about my ironing surface. What I love best about this one and why I did it is because an ironing board that is made for clothing, you know, has the shape that's intended for sleeves or for plackets or things like that. And when you're making quilts on an ironing surface, it is so nice to have a square and straight edge. You know, when you're pressing binding, for example, you can line it up, or when you're pressing a long seam, you can line it up with these straight edges. And I think it really makes pressing for a quilt so much easier to have a rectangular or square shape as opposed to the traditional ironing board. I did that for a long, long time thinking it's not worth the effort. But after I transitioned to this, I thought, gosh, I should have done that a long, long time ago. Yeah, see, my red piece is short, but that's okay. I'm just for the heck of it, going to fold this in half and make sure that I've got my, what did I say, 66 inches of width? Where's my paper? Yep. Because if I didn't, it would be fairly easy to add a bit more red on right now. But it'll be much harder after it's all sewn together. So let's just make sure this is 33. It is. It's actually almost 34. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. It's coming together, you guys. And I should say, too, this solution is maybe not for everybody, right? Some people may be like, just give me a 108-inch wide backing and cut it to length and let me be done with it. I don't want all that fiddly stuff. And that's 100% fine if that's you. But many quilters are, you know, frugal / sustainable people, and many of us do either enjoy the challenge of doing this or love the idea of using up the bits and bobs that we have. And that's what's appealing about it to me. Again, in my workshop, I talked at some length about using things like orphan blocks or bits that were left over from the front of the quilt. And one of my examples was a quilt that I made some years back, and it was a kit that I acquired, and it was quite far outside of my usual taste as to fabric. So when I was finishing that quilt, I was like, I don't really want scraps of this hanging around. They're not going to play well with my other scraps. And so I found a way to use them up, use that all up in the backing so I don't have leftover bits accumulating that I don't know what to do with. So that to me is one of the appeals. It allows me to use up those little bits. And in the case of today's projects, it's some fabrics that have been backings in other quilts, and there's enough left for a quarter of this one. And so I like that challenge. Finding a way to cobble it together and use it up. And it's very fitting for a quilt that is 100% scrappy. I checked my bobbin before we started, and I'm fully expecting that any minute I will run out of bobbin thread. I haven't so far. How does that old saying go? I did my best stitching, only there was no thread in the bobbin. But generally my Bernina tells me. So that's a plus. Okay, again, pressing toward the red. And I'm not going to worry about the fact that my cream is longer. After I get all my pieces in place, I will come back and smooth out this edge. And by the way, if those differences were tiny, I wouldn't even smooth it out. I would start loading on my long arm from the straight edge and just let them hang off. But to have them massively different means my grippers won't be holding all the fabrics, right? So that's not going to work, to have those massive differences. And honestly, if you're a little more particular than I am, you know, you could sit with a graph paper, for example, and map this out and be sure that you were happy with the proportions before you started whacking it up. As you see, I'm not working with a highly particular quilt, so I did not choose to do that. I am just getting it together. And the proportions it ends with, that's just what it's going to be. So. Last piece, you guys. Here it is. No right or wrong, or no up or down to this one. So again, keeping my left sides lined up and just diving in. And this is the last seam. So after this is done, probably I'll take your last questions, and I don't know that I will do the final trim here. I think it would be a lot easier and on my big cutting table where I can have the whole quilt laying and not risk it, you know, pulling askew. But I will hold it up and show you, and we'll have a look at the quilt that it's going to match one more time. Okay, funny story. When I sewed these two pieces together, I've got a 1/4 inch jog there. That will not work. So my choices are either to trim that to be perfectly straight, or what I'm going to do instead, which is just flip this end for end so that my straight edge is at the top. Because that little tiny jog won't matter when I'm loading it on the long arm, because it will be along this side. This, by the way, is something I do frequently. You guys that know me know this already. When it's my own quilt anyway, I'm thinking all the way through about what I might want to put on the backing or what design I might want to quilt on it. And all of those things inform whether I, for example, load my quilt top to bottom on the long arm or whether I load it side to side. Just depends. Depends on the direction I want the seams to go. Depends on whether I have directional quilting designs, all those sorts of things. So all those decisions are up to you to make. Whatever suits the project in hand. I don't think there's a one right way to do that. I mentioned earlier that someone said hello from Florida, and I said we're heading down there shortly. That might have been in the pre-show. Anyway, we are, in fact, early in March. Dave and I are taking the entire fam, and we've got a VRBO, and we are going to go have a holiday together. So we're pretty stoked about that. All right, now we've got some bulky fabric to hold up. So we're just going to take our time, rearrange it as we need to, so that it's not pulling askew or weighing us down. So get your last questions in, because we won't be very much longer, or comments or thoughts about what you're working on. And I'll reiterate again, I did pin a comment right at the top with a link to the workshop where I talked about creative backings. Like I said, showed tons and tons of ideas, many of them from client quilts. And walked through some of my best tips for how to do it, how I think through that design process, what I think works when you're doing a pieced backing, what does not work as well, those sorts of things. So that is available as an instant access sort of replay. We tidy it up a little bit and take the chatty intro out and things like that, divide it up into chapters a little, and then make it available to anyone who wants to see that, not live, but instant access. And it does not expire, so you can watch it as many times as you want to. I'm quite pleased with this. For cobbling it together, for deciding on the fly, it's coming together pretty nicely. I'm quite pleased. This particular fabric, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm 95% sure, I made a quilt the first year that Dave and I were married, so that was 1990. And it had, surprise, surprise, a Wedgwood blue background and a lot of rose-colored fabrics in it. And it was hand appliqued. And this was one of the fabrics from that quilt. So it's been around for a while. Time to get it used up. And or pass it on to someone else to use up. And that would have been hand quilted. That was long before my machine quilting era. Dave, would you mind handing me a tissue, please? Thank you. Piece of trivia that you probably know already. The skin is a human's largest organ. And it's kind of funny because one of the things I find when my AD is acting up so much is that I feel 100% of the time like I have the flu. I have just had a cold too, but even without that, I just constantly have that, achy joints, chills, those sorts of things. It's odd. You just don't think of all those things going together, but they do. The skin can affect how you feel. It does. Okay, that was my last little seam. Let's find that leader ender. I do try, and I will keep trying, to do some type of live and unscripted episode once a month at a minimum. So if you want to know when the next one is or what the topic is, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. There's a link for that in the description below this and I think every episode. So my newsletters are often story-based and have little tips in them, so I'd love to see you there. Yeah, that's the end of our creative backing though. Let us quickly press this one before we critique it. Sure, we'll take questions. Whew. Okay, I'm ready. Get my coffee in hand. Oh, Mr. Producer's hunting. Sometimes they do get buried.
I can't find it, so you're going to get the unedited one.
Okay. Have you ever had a pieced backing that just would not work? And if so, why did it not work? Maybe you need to clarify. Like, do you mean I was piecing it and I couldn't get that piecing to work, or a pieced backing that wouldn't work when I got to the long arm to quilt it? So clarify that for me if you would, and then I'll come back and answer it.
Okay.
Oh, there's more. Sorry. I'm sorry. Naomi. Would making the backing fiber strips in different lengths and staggered down the backing look okay? I'm not sure what you mean by staggered down the backing. Like, I make my strips at least as wide as I need my whole backing to be, and they can be longer or shorter, but the shortest one has got to be long enough, and then trim them. That's kind of what I'm doing today. Is that what you mean? Like, you could piece them to make a strip. That's what I did with the red. Well, the big cream ones too, actually. And I've done more piecing than that to make a strip. I've done that with scraps or orphan blocks, just piece them end to end until I get that insertion strip. Certainly all of those would work. When you get to the long arm, okay. I have had a pieced backing that I couldn't deal with at the long arm, and I think I showed a picture of this in that workshop. But in summary, it was a lady who brought me a vintage quilt, so it was pieced, and it had a border added around it. And then the backing, she had pieced and it wasn't big enough, so she added a border around the backing, and her border was tight, like way tight. So that central portion was all full and bubbly and wavy. No way to deal with that at the long arm. It was severe. It was inches, right? And you can't stretch that shorter one longer. So fortunately, that little border that was on the quilt, the front of the quilt, was in poor shape. It was terribly, terribly frayed, and it didn't match well either. So I conferred with the client and I got her permission to take that border off the quilt, making that backing big enough without its border. So I took the border off and was able to proceed. I think that's the only time that I've had one that I absolutely couldn't get it to work. Most of my clients have been clients for a long time, and they have figured out this backing deal, and they're very, very good about getting pretty flat pieced backings to me. Yeah, long story, but interesting. Linda, just watching, no sewing for me right now. Broke my wrist and arm in a splint. Oh, and am in a splint for a little longer. Oof, ouch. Well, I hope you've got a good cup of coffee or tea. Thank you for joining us, though.
This is an awesome idea.
Okay, here comes an awesome idea. I made my ironing board with striped fabric. Works great for lining up seams. Super idea if you've got a great stripe. Actually, I need to recover mine soon, so I'll fish through my stash and see if I have a nice stripe there. Yeah, same principle, just going one step further, right, than having just a rectangular board. Yeah. Carol, I went to the tack supply near me and got a wool saddle pad. Works great. Yes, I've known lots of people who have those too, and it does some of the same things as this iron in that when you're using a regular iron and steam goes down, the wool pad sort of reflects it back up and does both sides at the same time. Yeah, good thought. Okay, two-part. Part one, For side clamping on my long arm, I use $2 store rulers back to back on the backing fabric, then attach my clamps to the rulers. I hope this makes sense. Okay, part 2. Oh, someone else. What a good idea. Thinking I might add something grippy to the backs of the rulers. Spray grippy or rubbery shelf liner, etc. Thanks for the idea. Yep. I agree. I'm not sure what are you clamping them with? The clamps that came with your machine? In which in which case, like a drawer liner, you know, that slightly rubbery, slightly cushy stuff on the rulers would really help that grip to be the same all the way along the length of the ruler. Yeah, that's a great DIY idea. Super. Ashley, what fabric do I use for a blanket? So are you wanting to make a quilt? And in general, Ashley, we look for 100% cotton fabrics for quilts. But in actual experience, quilts are made with all kinds of things. And certainly my mother and grandmother made it with any fabrics they had. Denims, knits, satins. I have quilted all of those mixed into memory quilts at one time or another. Will I see you at the Quilt Festival in Spokane in April? I think so. That's the Rusty Barn one. Is that right, Meg? And yes, I will come to it at some point, although I'm not working it or vending it, so I won't be there the whole time, but hopefully I'll see you and wave and say hi. Elaine, thanks to you and Dave and all the support crew for making this live possible. I recommend Stitched by Susan to all my quilty friends of various stages. I love that. Thank you. You've been such an encouragement to me. I appreciate that because certainly that is my goal. I mentioned earlier that it can be, you know, though this isn't a lesson, it can be so beneficial to just do something alongside someone else. When I was learning to sew, I was fortunate to have a sister-in-law who was a fair bit older than me. So when I was in middle school, she was already my sister-in-law and was an excellent seamstress. So starting then and going all the way through when my girls were young, we would get together and sew. And just the act of working together, initially I learned tons from her, but over time, as I made forward steps, we would learn from each other. And it was just so beneficial to sew together. Of course, we long armers can't really do that. So that's always been my hope for my show, is that it kind of feels like that, like we're getting together to quilt together.
One last one, then we're done.
Okay, last one. Quilted Penguin. You said weight of fabric hanging when you stand to sew can be a challenge. Maybe tack or staple a hammock to the underside of the table, similar to a batting hammock. Another use for a piece of unloved scrap fabric. I mean, that's the best feature of it. You absolutely could. I find that pulling up my chair and hanging my fabric over the back of my chair works too, and it's easier, but you absolutely could do a hammock like that too. More DIY ideas, you guys. It's fabulous. Okay, let me press this and hold it up for you. And then we'll be done for today. Again, thumbs up if you've loved this episode. It's a bit out of my ordinary, but occasionally we have sewing and not quilting episodes. So yeah, I appreciate the thumbs up. And again, I forgot to steam first, and then I get great globs of water at the very beginning. You see me lifting it because I'm trying to get that seam allowance to go toward the red, right? And I'm watching, and it is doing that. If you wonder why I'm lifting it, that's why. One more. Okay, here's our straight side. I'll hold it sideways up so you can see all the fabric bits. So this is going to be the top edge of my quilt, although the quilt itself does not really have a specific top and bottom, but top edge of my quilt, moving down through a little red section, traveling to Downton Abbey, another little red section, and on into the little blue stripe. That's it. I will put it on my table here so you can see it a little bit with all the fabrics showing a touch. I'll try to do that. This way a little more. I think we've got it, Dave. You can see them all together. They're just a similar feel. They're that kind of tea-dyed color, and I'm thrilled. I have used up X number of yards of fabric out of my basket of goodies, and someone is going to get a lovely quilt with a lovely backing on it. So yay. I will really try to plan an episode either in March or in April, to quilt this project so that you can see this being used and see the quilt with its little challenges that it had. See how that comes together. Okay, Mr. Producer's waving violently. Oh, one more comment. Apparently this one's important. Quilted Penguin, life is more than only long arming, so this was great. I found a great pattern, was introduced to your niece, picked up a great tip from another viewer, and lots of great info from you as usual. Fantastic. I'm satisfied. This is like a little quilting bee. And again, that's what I want it to be. So thank you all for joining me. Thanks if you're watching this as a replay. Watch for the next live one. It is so fun to get together in person and be able to chat back and forth a little bit. So once again, thanks for tuning in. I'm Susan Smith, and I will catch up to you next time.